Welcome to the Index podcast, where we come together every couple of weeks to discuss on-chain data, track trends, and metrics that move the crypto industry. Today I have with me Hildobby, resident data house elf at Dragonfly.
Hello, everyone.
Denning, chief on-chain sleuth at Pantera Capital.
Hi.
And I am Boxer, the community powers at Dune. Before we start, nothing we say here should be relied upon as legal, financial, investment, tax, or even life advice. We are acting independently of our respective professional roles. And with that, there was quite some news in the DeFi scene over the last few days, as there was a big exploit of, let's call it a token for now. We'll kind of like unbundle what that means, like what the blast radius of this exploit was. But I think, Denning, you have kind of like, we found a tweet that explains the situation very well. I think like we're not gonna go into the deep technical weeds here of like how this exploit actually happened, what that means, but like what the technical implementation what that mean, but rather like let's keep it like relatively high level.
Yeah, so basically, we just had a really big hack, I think like a month ago or so on the Drift protocol Solana. And I think it was also on a Sunday. And I think it was also North Korean. I'm picking up some patterns here, but like okay, yeah, right. And this was also like during the weekend, pretty much on the Sunday, and identified also as the Lazarus group from North Korea. And basically they started it was like hacking Kelp DAO, which is a restaking protocol. And they basically like did some kind of tricks on the RPC. I think, Boxer, you're going to dig deeper into that part, but like, I think on the bridge part, right? Like the LayerZero part, and they basically like, how to say, like hacked their Kelp DAO for 290 mil rsETH. And then the smart thing they did was they didn't dump it directly on DEX because they will have like a huge amount of loss by dumping it themselves with such a huge amount. They borrowed it, they basically deposited on Aave and then borrowed out a huge amount of ETH out of it. And this basically triggered a bunch of, like lock. And so like Kelp DAO stopped like redeeming this rsETH, obviously after the exploit, which makes the token's value goes down to 0, which caused a huge amount of bad debt on Aave as well. So it's like the cascading effect of this is like a really big, actually first ever actual like DeFi bank run. So which caused a lot of like, how to say, panic, I think, in the market, and also drained, or not drained, but like a lot of the amount are withdrawal from the Aave TVL. I think it went down from like 26 by like 10 billion TVL. So it was pretty crazy. And then like there are some other like cascading effect afterwards, because like the hackers, they deposited amount into both Ethereum and Arbitron. So Arbitron afterwards, their security council figured out like this is actually a lot of money in the lending protocol at risk. They freezed the 71 million in the lending protocol, which also kind of like, it's a good thing to do, but like caused a lot of controversial, being like, oh, the chain is kind of centralized, right? Like it's kind of ironic. But yeah, I think later on they kind of like pushed the money into a Thor chain, paid a little amount, like washed the money out, now convert to Bitcoin, and then like bridged to Tron, swapped for USDT, and like got some OTC through some Chinese aggregators. And yeah, like they fully used DeFi in the smartest way. Like it's such a shame. Like I think the greatest DeFi smart contract engineer of our time is North Korean, I think. So like it's really sad. And I think it caused a lot of shock across the community, because like DeFi never had really like a real bank run, because everything's controlled by smart contracts. And so if the collateral ratio dropped by a little bit because the deposit assets value dropped, you will pause the borrow, you will pause the whole mechanism. But here, so
you say like smart contract, but the hack wasn't a smart contract hack.
No. So everything is like by design. Like DeFi worked as they were supposed to, but I think the exploit was vulnerable on the bridge side, which was called out in our podcast.
Yeah, I think let's start unbundling this whole stack like step by step. I think the first thing is like, okay, what actually got exploited? So there's a token that's like rsETH, which I assume stands for restaked ETH. It was issued by Kelp DAO. So there was like this big restaking narrative 2 years ago where it's like, okay, you can stake your ETH into a ETH validator, and then we can use that ETH as economic security for other things as well. And of course, this is kind of like to juice up the yield of that staked ETH. So like I get yield from just validating Ethereum, and then I also get yield for providing kind of like additional economic security to other things. So of course, it's like if I want to juice up my yield even further, it would be useful if I can kind of like take my deposited ETH or like my already restaked ETH, deposit it into a lending protocol, then kind of like take out a loan against that, and then kind of like acquire more staked ETH. And kind of like by that, like kind of like that's what looping is. It's like I kind of like take an asset, put it as a collateral into a lending protocol, borrow against that. Then the money that I borrowed, I just put into the lending protocol again. And then with that, like again, borrowed money, I can kind of like have more collateral, and then kind of like my health factor. So like the kind of like usually you have a kind of like a cap against what you have, like your collateral, and then like how much can you borrow against that. It kind of like gets thinner on the margins, where like every price move affects you a lot more because like your overall position is kind of is leveraged. But anyways, so that's why kind of like rsETH exists, and why it's utilized inside of like lending protocols. It's just like kind of like people are looping this to like juice up the yield on their ETH. So then kind of like rsETH was issued by Kelp DAO, but then there's bridged versions of this, which kind of like are distributed across multiple networks. So I can have rsETH on I don't even know what the main chain was where it's issued. It's probably like Ethereum mainnet. Let's just say that. I wouldn't need to research, but it doesn't really matter for like the explanation. It's like, and then you can have a version of rsETH on Base, and you can have a version of rsETH on Unichain, and you can have a version of rsETH on whatever, Cello, and you can have a version of rsETH on like multitude of chains. So they were using the LayerZero messaging protocol for this. This is like a very standard standard process inside of DeFi. Like you want your token to be multi-chain, you kind of like you do a few configurations with LayerZero, you deploy the token across those chains, and like everything works wonderfully in the good case. So what has now happened is there's essentially a message. So like there's a LayerZero messaging protocol, which is kind of like if I send a token from Base to Cello, then I need to kind of like have a like I send the tokens on, or like I start sending them on Base, and then on the receiver chain. So on Cello, there would be kind of like there's a receiver smart contract, or like a smart contract that kind of like has the connection to a LayerZero node, that then kind of like gives the permission to like, hey, I can actually mint this. So like that's how the two chains are connected, right? Like they're not going through Ethereum mainnet or something like this. There's like a LayerZero messaging network that kind of like transmits these messages between the different networks, and therefore kind of like makes it possible to bridge tokens. So now the issue is, or the high level understanding that I have is like this LayerZero messaging network has like, it can have different configurations. And essentially, if like you can configure it in a way that only one of the LayerZero nodes has to kind of like signal that, hey, you are allowed to mint like whatever. I think they minted 290 million of rsETH on some chain. So there was some exploit in the kind of like messaging network of LayerZero, where it's like, okay, this node kind of transmitted a wrong message. And if you read the issue statement, or like the incident response from the LayerZero team, they kind of like, they go into technical details of like, hey, like 2 RPCs were somehow exploited or like vulnerable to an attack, and there was a third one that was safe, but that one was then DDoSed, so it couldn't actually respond. So there's like a bunch of technical details that I think we are not qualified to really talk about. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like someone faked a message from, I think the Unichain was the origin chain, and then they minted on, I don't know where they minted, but I know that the Unichain, like the Unichain node essentially was like, it's not related to the Unichain. The Unichain itself is completely fine. It's just like the LayerZero messaging network essentially had like a wrong, like not a wrong configuration. Somebody actually like found a security exploit in in whatever like node architecture LayerZero uses, and then use that to mint $290 million of this rsETH asset. So I think that's the first part of the hack. So like now essentially there's like, I think how much rsETH was in circulation before. Does anyone know? Probably like
1.5 billion, and there's like 18% added to that supply essentially. So about $300 million.
So suddenly there's a lot more rsETH floating around the ecosystem that have no backing in like actual ETH tokens. Like usually you would have to kind of like either if you do a bridge action, you have to send your like the whatever 290 million worth of rsETH somewhere, and to be able to like mint those amounts of token on the other chain. But in this case, it just simply like out of nothing, out of thin air, 290 million worth of rsETH have been minted. And then I think that's where we kind of like, but maybe let's pause here. Is there any questions, comments about this process?
No, I mean, I think you explained it pretty well, but basically, like, whatever the 101 is, like, they call it the 1-to-1 DVN, like, decentralized verifier network. It's pretty much saying, like, as you said, like, there needs to be enough verifier to approve that this message can be actually broadcasted. But then the setup was 101. It's equivalently, you have a multi-sig, but it's just one person. So it's basically like centralized node, and it's a single point of failure that happened, where they basically like get the receiving node and caused it.
Yeah.
There's like an old thread by a guy called Z-Frame who was calling out this process like in 2022 and asking like Brian Pellegrino, the CEO of LayerZero, about basically more detail about these 101 or 102s. And Brian's response was basically Oracle and Relayer. I'm citing him. Oracle and Relayer have no constraint on them how they're constructed. Each could be a distributed system of over 1,000 independent validators. But the criticism that he was saying back is like, why aren't those shown on chain rather than like just, culminated into one like entity? Like the whole point of decentralization is we could even like, properly show this and have the network infrastructure to decentralize these structures. It's kind of weird to kind of have the centralized system within a huge part of the decentralized infrastructure we use. So yeah, I don't know. Interesting point, I guess.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, it's like, this doesn't mean that the whole LayerZero network is suspectable to exploit. It was just this configuration of like specifically this token, which is just the standard configuration that LayerZero mentioned in their docs, was possible to exploit. And I would assume that the North Korean hackers basically chose like whatever the highest value target is. Like they probably like they had exactly like this exit route, and like the way that they then kind of like this whole thing unfolded, they had that in mind before. They probably scoped this out very tightly and just kind of like chose this exploit specifically. They could have probably like exploited other tokens, since this is just a default configuration. Somebody else probably had like exactly the same issue. It's just that Kelp DAO got like they just had the most attractive target on their backs.
To be fair,
yeah,
to be fair, as you said, like it's the the issuer for this like assets who chose this configuration, right? So Kelp DAO chose this 1-to-1 DVN, and they were blaming LayerZero, being like, oh, their node got hacked. But then I think it's a really good reminder for any asset issuer, like I don't think it's LayerZero to blame here. I think it's kind of like their own responsibility that they chose like a 1-to-1 vulnerable setup. I don't know what you guys think.
LayerZero is like the default recommended setup by LayerZero, FYI. So okay. I think there's a bit of responsibility there.
Yeah, I think that's like essentially that's like a very active discussion, and everyone's kind of lawyering up. And this is, I think this is gonna go to the courts. There doesn't seem to be like a reasonable resolution that people are getting over handshakes here. But like I think worth mentioning is that like Tether, for example, uses LayerZero for their USDT zero like bridging, right? And like this is absolutely no problem, because Tether actually has a configuration that is like, I haven't looked into the exact config details, but there's like essentially it's not a 1-of-1. It's probably like a 3-of-5 or 5-of-7, or I don't know what exactly like this quorum is, and like what the other nodes in the network are that need to agree. But essentially like if you just chose the default configuration with just the master nodes from, I'm just using this term master nodes to describe like I don't think it's an official LayerZero term. It's just like those nodes from LayerZero that they kind of like put into the market. It's the same as like the graph. Like you can have a decentralized graph, but like everyone is using the hosted graph network. And it's like I feel like LayerZero kind of is in the same situation where it's like you can have this like decentralized node network to like really have like secure bridging and like you can run your own bridge and whatever. And it's like, yeah, at the end of the day, most people are just going to use kind of the standard version. And then I feel like morally, it feels like LayerZero's like has to ensure that if you use the default configuration, it's not susceptible to exploits.
Yeah.
But anyway, so much for like that's the exploit. So now we are in a situation where there's 290 million of rsETH that's just kind of floating around. And now the North Korean hackers are able to do anything with this. They can bridge this to other chains. They can deposit this into DeFi. They can kind of like they can do whatever they want. Also, this is a Sunday afternoon. Most people are not paying attention. I think even some like I think the first mention of this is not some kind of like incident statement from Kelp DAO. It's like some user who's like, "Hey man, is everything okay?" Like just literally like a public message on Twitter, which like is absolutely horrible and like very scary. That like still we don't like. Why is there no alarm going off if we suddenly mint like 290 million of an asset that has like a 1.5 billion supply? Why is there no like like alarm? There's like a 18% increase in our circulating supply. Shouldn't that like ring any alarm bells? Very, very, very strange. But anyway, so they have this rsETH, and essentially what they start doing is they deposit this. So rsETH for some reason, and like this is where we also must go into like, okay, why the fuck was this? And they deposit it into Aave, and then essentially then they have a huge collateral position on Aave, and against that they just kind of like take out assets on the withdraw on the lending side of Aave. Like that's how Aave is supposed to work. The problem here is this rsETH is of course like it's not backed by real ETH, so like it's potentially worthless. It's like I don't know, like if you take the whole rsETH supply, and I think Dobby said it's like an increase of 18%. So theoretically, if you socialize the losses across all rsETH, like all folks who hold rsETH, at the moment in time that they first deposited, it's like you kind of have like an asset that's like 18% less worth than what is originally worth, because there's just an 18% of the supply are unbacked. But then, like, of course, as the news spreads, everyone who holds rsETH, like, starts withdrawing this, starts kind of redeeming this, starts selling this on the open market. So over time, like, kind of like this ratio degrades, and the asset becomes more worthless over time, because people are kind of like using the original redemption price and not the 18% deflated redemption price. I actually haven't taken a look at like any price charts of this, but probably that is kind of what happened. And eventually Kelp DAO got the node and they stopped the redemptions. And then of course the market, like anyone who had like liquidity in any kind of like DeFi protocol, any solver who's like on their feet would kind of like withdraw liquidity from this and no longer take any orders on these pools, right?
Yeah, I think there are two things very important to mention, which is when you say the word socialize, right? Like Aave has a pooled design compared to like a lot of people were discussing this, like saying Morpho in this case will be safer because they have an isolated market design. So in which case the rsETH bad debts won't affect other pool that is separate from them. But in the Aave case, the bad collateral gonna affect across the markets. And the other part is that I think like usually when the collateralization rate drop, or like I think it's equivalent in a way to health factor, right? Like so. Also, first of all, like back in 2018 or 2020, when I was like when in 2020 was building those DeFi lending dashboards, the collateralization ratio was like 150% or at least 130%. But I think this one was like 1.01, 1.03. It's like very levered. Like it's very levered to the level of like you can almost basically 101 borrowing out like ETH amount of the rsETH you deposit. And so like usually when the deposited assets price drop, there's another row which is liquidator. and they can like liquidate the collateral and basically pay back the debt. So to basically keep the whole platform healthy. But in this case, because the underlying asset were marked as zero already, and there's no buyer, and so there's like the Oracle kind of like caused issues. So
yeah, the
I mean,
the
Aave
Oracle
is
ratio was greatly increased over time to like allow for more looping and more basically pumping the Aave TVL. I think there's Spark, which is another protocol that has gained a lot of market share since in terms of open interest, because that collateral ratio is a lot more conservative there, and people move there because it's more secure. Because where this to happen on Spark, basically people would have been safe. It would have been within how do you say, like within a territory that can be recovered based on what funds are available. So that's also part of the problem, is the ratio was too high, and also the monolithic lending market, I guess, is also it was, I think, like it's a great way to. Back when Aave started, it was awesome because things were much smaller, but now things are growing to a scale where maybe a monolithic market doesn't actually make as much sense. And Morpho, I guess I'm proud to be French in a way, is doing great with their curated markets. Yeah, they just Morpho just became I think this week the number one company in terms of revenue per employee in France.
wow.
And it became a unicorn as well. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay,
Thought it was
cool.
cool. That was just
Yeah,
before
yeah.
the hack, I think.
Yeah, interesting.
But
But
I
maybe let's quickly detangle why Morpho specifically is like a better suited thing here. So I think, like in layman's terms, like on Aave you have one giant deposit site and one giant lending site. So if whether you deposit ETH or USDC or USDT or rsETH, problematically, like it all goes into kind of like it's a giant scale, and the scale tries to stay in balance. And
yeah.
whether you with like you borrow assets, like it all goes against it. Kind of like you have one unionized collateral pool, and one kind of like from that pool other people can just kind of like borrow assets. And in Morpho we have like way more isolated pools where I'll have I guess it's like a very singular pool design, right? Like there isn't even like two assets. There's always just one asset, and against that asset, I can borrow stablecoins. I think most
Yeah,
of them.
not just one. It's pool. Anyone can be a curator and create their own vaults, and it could be any set of tokens. But essentially, it is on the vault curator to, you know, to make sure that those assets are good in terms of, won't have any problem long term. And the issue here is Aave's due diligence, I guess, let in slip, Kelp DAO's token, which they didn't account for LayerZero's potential liability, I guess.
Yeah. I think that is actually like I haven't heard that criticism as much. Where like, what the fuck is the Aave governance doing that they're allowing tokens with the default LayerZero configurations into their like collateral pool essentially? Like I'm a little bit surprised
I
that this
mean,
is not a bigger
I
conversation. At least I haven't been on Twitter that much in my so like maybe people have raised this, but like you would kind of assume that like, hey, the default configuration from LayerZero is fine, but then kind of like should that be the level of standard that we hold like assets to that want to be included in like the Aave monolithic deposit pool? I feel like the Aave model is kind of like not disproven as a whole, because like the capital efficiency of this and the kind of convenience for users is like very, very cool. And like it's actually like really nice that we can do this, right? It's also like one of the reasons why FTX was so successful is because you could kind of like, there wasn't like isolated margin pool, but rather you could just hold like Bitcoin on the platform, and then you could use that to kind of like take on leverage on whatever ETH or like some shitcoin that they just listed or something. Like this was actually a kind of like a financial innovation where it's like, okay, we have one kind of like big deposit pool, and then you can just kind of like do things against it. It's actually
Yeah.
nice, but of
Yeah.
course, the more assets Aave lists, the more kind of difficult this gets to manage and to kind of like assume the right risk, because it's such a modal like problem at that point, where it's like
Yeah.
you have so many risks that are like also kind of like the risk kind of like stack up, and there's like relations between the different assets, and like if it's just
Yeah.
ETH, USDC, and USDT, it would have been completely fine. Like that model works perfectly fine. But now that there's like, I don't know how many fucking assets are in Aave, and like this has repeatedly been a problem where it's like, I
Yeah.
don't know, even with like some smaller tokens, and like should there really be like a 60% LTV ratio on the Uniswap token or something like this? I think there was like a lot of these discussions from like multiple angles of like whether it's like the security or like even the, can we liquidate enough of these tokens? Is there enough liquidity of these tokens where liquidators can even sell it if they have to seize the assets because somebody's loan to asset ratio like drops below a certain level? So like there's all kinds of considerations. If you just had like the major tokens in there, it would be fine. Now I think they need to kind of like go back to the drawing board and really think about what is the strategy here.
Yeah, yeah. To also like clarify that, I think like Aave does have specific parameters, risk parameters, for each asset pool. But then I think like the total amount you can borrow is on like account level. So it's like if you deposited a rsETH, you as a person, like you can still borrow from other pool. That is the part that is like correlating all the risk across assets on the like the user individual account level. And so I feel like once that layer, it gets really complicated. I feel like I don't want to like throw shades, but I feel like maybe this is something that Gauntlet could have done, right? Like looking into like bridge asset as a risk, but also I don't know. I think the takeaway here is
I I don't know. I'm not familiar enough with the Aave governance, or like there was like so many kind of like service contractors, or however
true.
however these
Yeah.
people were called. I don't know if it's like Gauntlet or if it's the Avachan initiative or like any of these service providers. There must be some like one of the service providers definitely was responsible for this,
Yeah.
and they should kind of like do their internal accounting. But also, it's very hard to actually kind of like be like, oh, this was like a grave mistake, because at the end of the day, this is the default LayerZero configuration. And like I really think that like you need to point back at LayerZero and be like, guys, what the fuck? Like you can't put this thing into like it's I'm
Yeah.
looking for a good example, but it's like
For like LayerZero, I think it's the interesting thing is various people have tried to call this out. Like I mentioned, D-Frame earlier, and there's a few other threads that are kind of re-popping up on the timeline lately. And the response is kind of weird, where like LayerZero is so big, first of all, that like, if you're like a pseudonymous guy on Twitter, like you have no power. You can call them out, but you're just a nobody to them. And a lot of the response feel a bit like gaslighting into, yeah, but like what the fuck, like it's worked till now, like why, like clearly it's working. And that's true for a lot of things. It's just like things work till they fuck up, and it's, to a lot of people, they burn some bridges in their systems to get to what they are faster, because you can obviously implement things better if you bypass some security measures that are implemented by other bridges in some forms. But yeah, it's LayerZero, as we pointed out, I guess, on a pod a few weeks ago with Luca Dono from L2Beat. LayerZero has a lot of configurations and a lot of things, and it seems very, it's hard to monitor everything that's going on in LayerZero given all the different configs. And sure, it's very modular, but it does mean it's susceptible to a lot more attack points in their system. And North Korea was able to find one of them.
Yeah, Luca a few weeks ago basically made the point that like, hey, because LayerZero or like some of these assets are native to so many or like not native, but like because so many chains are part of the LayerZero network that you can bridge between, only one of these chains needs to be exploited and kind of like send a faulty message to another chain, and then all of like basically all of the chains in the network that you can bridge this asset around can be in danger. It turns out it was not one of the L2s that actually got exploited, but rather it was the LayerZero network itself. So kind of like slightly different angle, but I think Luca definitely had like the right intuition or like the right idea of like, hey, we have like a lot of assets in DeFi that are just kind of like secured by one-of-one multisigs or by like very spooky kind of like weird network configurations. I mean, they're not spooky, but like not properly set up network configurations, or like there's essentially like a big blast radius, or like a unknown kind of like I don't know. There's like a very big surface area of attack that can kind of like influence these tokens in a negative manner. And exactly this has happened. Not exactly as Luca kind of like warned about, but I mean, very close to that. So we could take a look at L2B data, and like I maybe it's interesting to just kind of like look at the scale that LayerZero is operating on. So maybe let me share my screen here for a second. And while I prepare this,
while you prepare that, I just want to mention also that actually Kelp DAO managed to react and block further minting. Essentially, according to Tai, a really good security researcher, publishes a lot on Twitter. I don't know. You guys for sure should follow her. Great stuff. She recounted the whole timeline. They started testing on like April 16th, doing like tornado cash transaction to refill gas and stuff like this throughout. And then on the day of the hack, at Pyongyang time, so North Korea time, they sent the first hack transaction for 116,000 rsETH to be minted at like 2:35, and then they attempted to do another one 2 hours later, but Kelp managed to freeze this, and it would have otherwise resulted in minting like 40,000 additional ETH. So they actually, managed to mitigate that second hack. And it took time to do this because they needed to refill the bridge. So, they hack one way, then they refill the bridge by sending money the other way, and then they can rehack again. So yeah, just FYI, I guess.
Yeah, this chart looks like, I feel like if they labeled which one is one-to-one DVN, it's almost like a vulnerability map right now. It's like where you can hack, basically.
I would think that the configurations on the networks have been fixed by now, but essentially, so what we're seeing here for people that are only audio listeners is there's a kind of network graph that shows us from which chains LayerZero is facilitating kind of like bridging between. So like we see like a connection between Ink and Ethereum. That's essentially, I think if we look at the flows, we can see there's 51.53 million. I mean, I don't need to be that specific, but 51 million of funds have flown from, I think, Ink to Ethereum, and then from Ethereum to Ink, we've seen an outflow of 7.7 million. And then the top tokens of this are USDT, USDT0, and USDE. But I think the overall picture, I don't think we need to go too deep into the details here. But essentially, LayerZero is facilitating a shit ton of value that flows through the ecosystem. And this becomes more prevalent if we actually zoom into one of these connections. So if we just kind of like observe the connections or the bridging activity between Ethereum and Base for specifically lock and mint protocols. I think if you are interested in this topic, go back and listen to the episode with Luca. I think this would take a little bit too long to explain, but on this, essentially, LayerZero is the third place for facilitating transfers between Ethereum and Base, only topped off by the Base canonical chain and by the Chainlink CCIP kind of messaging protocol. So
it is number one, basically yourself from ETH and USDC. Basically, that's because Base canonical is just ETH, I think, and CCIP is only USDC. So it's essentially the first one for every other asset.
Yeah, a lot of the long tail bridging essentially happens through LayerZero. Any like kind of like even like things like USDE or USDT0, like USDT uses the LayerZero infrastructure to facilitate their swapping, or their bridging. So it's not like, again, like it's not like the entire LayerZero network is exploited, and by now they've probably fixed their exploits. But LayerZero is a very big deal, and this could have been even worse. But thankfully, Only rsETH was exploited. But maybe so I think there's like an argument of like, hey, what the fuck are we even doing in DeFi? Like, what are all of these? Is DeFi dead now? Like, I think Aave famously has suffered, or like not famously, but Aave has suffered $10 billion of outflows, which I think is like 30% of the total TVL. Somebody pull up DeFi Llama MCP and check that.
Something like that, I think.
Oh no, I think they crossed 50 billion before, so it can't be that much.
We're at 14 billion right now, and on October 7th, which was the peak, it was at 24. But before the hack, it was wait, no, what the fuck? It was 43, sorry, at the peak, October 4th. And then April, before the hack, it was like 25. And then we went down to 15. 14, whatever.
Yeah. And the outflows are not stopping. It still seems like very much the outflow wave is continuing, which of course is very bad for Aave, which already has like some trouble, or like not trouble, but they had like all of these governance discussions, and like the Aave Labs entity essentially took over Aave, and like they I mean, all the, how do you call it, service providers quit on Aave. So there was already kind of like trouble in the making for Aave, and now this hack has happened, and it's gonna be very hard for Aave to, yeah, I don't know, just a lot of negative publicity at once over the last kind of couple of months. So we'll see how Aave fares in the next couple months. But I think there'll be before the podcast we quickly talked, and I said like, hey, this is a really difficult time for DeFi, and it's going to be really hard to recover from this. I would think that a lot of like the people that are on Aave, they were kind of there out of convenience, right? It's like, this is the Swiss bank of DeFi, and like nothing will ever happen here, and like this is like this is safe yield. Like if I have USDC, like personally I have some USDC on Aave, and like I'm just kind of like, you know, that USDC sits there, it collects yield, that's fine. But now it's like, oh my god, like, is my USDC safe? What the fuck are we doing? And I think a lot of the like bigger asset managers, and if you like are the manager of some treasury or something, now you're like, okay, I might just deposit into Coinbase Prime, you know? It even like Coinbase Prime, you at the moment gives you like better yield than Aave. So it was just kind of like, you know, I like having my funds on chain, whatever. Like I don't need to like move them for like having 2% or like, I don't know, 0.5% more yield on Aave, on Coinbase Prime or something. But now it's like, okay, Coinbase Prime is more safe and gives you more yield. Like probably like Coinbase Prime is eating really well right now because they're like, okay, oh, you can come to me, this is safe, like we're fucking an like SEC registered company, and like we have there's a huge treasury that we can draw down from if there's any security incidents and all of this stuff, and like the likelihood of something happening is also kind of lower. And I think like now essentially the security assumption of itself was not hacked, the smart contracts are completely fine, but it's just like, you know, this weird web of DeFi and like all of this leveraging and looping and like all of these weird assets and like all of this stuff is like, you know, if I'm a big treasury manager, I'd just be like, you know, fuck this. Like I'm just got like, my job is just to keep my money safe and like produce a safe yield, and like I'm gonna go back to CeFi, and like I don't really care. Like I can deposit my USDC into Coinbase and like I can sleep well at night.
You're pretty bearish on DeFi right now, Boxer, right?
I mean, you know, like North Korea has proven that DeFi can be really nice. It's like the way that you can like you can have like, I don't know, not North Korea. North Korea has just used like basic DeFi infrastructure to kind of like distribute, like clean their funds, which is like, that's not really what DeFi is about. I think the composable nature of DeFi is like, it's the nice part, but also what makes it dangerous, right? Like this is like the composable part of DeFi, where like somebody stakes ETH somewhere, and then like there's a restaking token, and now that restaking token can be bridged between like 10 to 20 different networks, and then it's like one of the layers of like that kind of like spaghetti or like that Lego brick stack fell apart. And it's like, that's just the problem of DeFi that has
Yeah.
happened again and again and again, where it's like the composability is its strength, but it's also like its biggest weakness, because like every time you kind of try to connect something, like there might be a weakling somewhere, and it's really hard to design the systems in a way that make them like really, really solid. And yeah,
I don't think DeFi itself failed at all. Like clearly, like DeFi worked as intended. It is an inherent part of the infrastructure that we use, that we leverage a lot, which is LayerZero, that has failed here. But it is, actually, if you look back, Ty, again, security researcher, tweeted that basically all North Korean hack historically, none of them have been smart contract hacks. It's always been through attacks vectors on, centralized databases, or, traditional hacks, if you will. And therefore, Aave suffered a fuck ton. And the problem here was more on the vault curation side than DeFi itself, right? But it's also an inherent part of growing this market. And if you look even on like centralized rails, all types of vaults, all types of lending markets can have bad debts if they're poorly managed, or if the underlying assets have any underlying issues. So that's just an inherent part of the system. It just happens that right now, Aave is the biggest, and it's a monolithic system that suffered from this asset being part of the pool, and the lending ratio being so low, and all these things going into play. But I do think we will rebuild and we'll grow from this, and it's just another learning that hopefully we won't fail at this again. I mean, that's my hope, is we learn from this. I don't rely on bridges that are secured in this way, and maybe there's just better infrastructure we can leverage, and LayerZero itself hopefully evolves. But Aave can even probably even raise basically to cover the bad debt. So I'm sure Aave will be fine in the long term. I'm sure it'll be like, it's just a huge beating, and it's a rough time, but I don't think Aave will come out of this as bad as it can seem.
Yeah. If I have to rank the issues here that caused the hack, the first is bridge, right? Like, I think bridge sucks as of its current state compared to DeFi. Like, there's so many security measures that it's not even being taken seriously and implemented. And then the second is like the risk of the risky assets that's being looped multiple times. And like, because this token is a recipient token and it was like easily hacked, because of the Kelp DAO team. I think that's a second issue comes forward. Mixing that asset's total amount into the collateral ratio is a risky thing that Aave's design wasn't thinking about. I think that's a third issue. But again, also, if I need to like argue for Aave, this is a design choice. It has pros and cons, right? Like, if you compare Aave and Morpho, having all the assets pulled together and having like a unified like parameters actually brings more capital efficiency in other cases when there's no risky assets. But then when you mingle that long tail risky assets into the bucket, then it's causing more damage possibly. So I don't know if you guys are gonna hate this, but I want to circle back our favorite metrics here, TVL. Like, let's talk shit about this again. I think like again, this metrics is so faulty that you look at the total TVL, this is 26 bill, but it doesn't really remind people of like the composition of the assets, that the breakdown of like what are being put in this bucket, and like what can be higher risk, what can be lower risk. And there was like some small and I wouldn't say argument, but like some discussion on Twitter among our friends group, right? Like, so Karina, she posted about like, we should actually differentiate different type of assets from the TVL. Like, say, if a lot of the assets are very looped across multiple protocols already, why would you even count them into TVL? I saw the DeFi Llama. I saw the DeFi Llama.
I think her comment was like, when we're looking at TVL, is looping included within its own system, so within Aave? But the way that, I think it's a misunderstanding, because the way that
I agree.
DeFi Llama, for example, includes it, is that it's all that is available minus the borrowed amounts. and therefore looping, you just remove the borrowed amount every time, and therefore you only have what is left available within the pool of assets that can be borrowed.
Yes. So I think he's misunderstanding what Karina says, or at least what I understand what Karina is trying to say. Like, I think me and Karina initially was discussing about that if the TVL includes st.eth, you should probably consider like what's the actual ETH behind the st.eth rather than counting the st.eth. Or like even just like take it away, or like even just like rate it separately. Like the current TVL doesn't consider the looped assets risk, but I think like the DeFi Llama guy, he misunderstood it. He said like, yeah, we don't count those, but the example he gave was like, if it's borrowed out, it's removed. So what their TVL really means is total deposit minus borrow, but that doesn't address the issue of having looped assets in the TVL, if that makes sense.
But how would the like you
Yeah,
mean if I leverage a staked ETH on a different platform and then deposit it into Aave?
Yeah, I think in that case, that deposit needs to be treated differently from
But you
TVL.
can't really do loops very efficiently across different platforms, because it kind of depends on you building up like a big collateral position on one platform and then kind of like redepositing. Like let's see like the loan to value ratio for staked ETH I think is 80. So like I deposit 100 staked ETH. Against that I can take out 80 ETH. Then I can take those 80 ETH, I can put them again into Aave, and then I have a deposit position of 180. I've drawn down 80 against this. So now the loan to value, like 180 times 80% is like whatever, like 155 or something like this, I would imagine. And then like, okay, now I can draw up to 155, so another like 60-ish.
Yeah,
I can draw from, so like
I see.
it depends on doing that. So like if you do this on any other platform, then like at the end what you can take out is like it doesn't really matter, because like if I go to whatever Cream first and like I deposit my stake ETH there and then I take 80 ETH against that, it's like it doesn't really matter, because like the amounts just get smaller over time. You can't just build like a giant position out of nothing across different platforms. Like it's not like you can flash loan and deposit into something. You need to pay.
So you're saying that the main looping case people do usually is within the same platform, and in the DeFi Llama's case, they're removing that looping. But I still feel like, okay, if you come in with rsETH, right, it's already a looped asset. That's what I'm saying. Like I feel like this asset is already
that asset is like there's like 3 layers to this, right? So that asset
it's
like
kind of looped 3 times already, right?
No, it's not looped. It's just like, so this sits in a validator. That's like ETH. Then so like because people don't want the validator stake to be locked up, but rather they just want to get the yield from this. It's like Kelp DAO essentially runs validators and then gives you like, it gives you back a deposit. So like you give your ETH to Kelp DAO, they stake it, and because they have like a big pool of validators, they can then kind of issue a token, and there's like they can kind of like have like virtual withdrawals and deposits into like into like a pool of validators.
Would you say rsETH is more risky asset than st.eth? That is riskier than ETH, because it's also possible that this rsETH comes from somebody who had an ETH and then staked into Lido, got st.eth, and then staked that into Kelp DAO and then got rsETH. So it's like whatever like price volatility like or hack. That's what I think that's what I meant by the looped assets.
That's what like that's like the Lego stack brick broke at some point, and like in this case it was like the bridge, but like it's already you're like layering levels of risk on top of each other.
So if Lido had any like panic or hack, and then it may also cause rsETH here cascade and like have problem on Aave too. So I'm just saying like this kind of TVL like needs to be discounted. I don't know.
But then when you're how would you as a data person do that? Because when I wanted to see Aave's TVL, most of the time I just want a number. I don't want like you to have like a a breakdown of 50 different numbers and stuff.
Yeah.
Most of the time simplicity is actually better.
Yeah.
Of course, digging down into number is always nice, and if it's
Maybe,
available,
yeah.
hell yeah.
So
But how?
I'm making it up right now, but like maybe for example, like I assume Aave should have different risk parameters for if you have this type of asset, how much you can borrow out based on the total underlying value there, right? And assumingly the riskier assets should have a lower ratio of amount that they should be able to borrow out based on that. And you should just look at like total borrowable amount rather than TVL. And so,
Okay.
I
but
mean,
I don't know.
I see your point, but if you have to discount any asset because it might potentially get hacked, then it has no business of being on Aave to begin with.
Yeah.
Like the assumption needs to be
Well,
that like this asset is absolutely safe and like nothing will ever happen to it. Otherwise, like it shouldn't get listed. And this is exactly like that's
Yeah,
essentially
exactly.
where the Aave governance or like whoever decided this like failed. Where it's like, this asset with this like spotty bridge configuration that like I don't know, 15 people in the world probably like fully understood the risks. Like I don't know, it just should have probably not been
wait, but
like properly included.
but you're kind of like discounting the whole purpose of the episode, right? Because like the idea is that like we need to differentiate risk, and like think about how 2008 happened. It's like very bad like CDP that was like being looped around. I don't
That's
know.
No,
you're
I
basically
mean,
trusting the curator when you're using the product, and that's so when you look at Aave numbers in general, it's
Mhm,
within the assumption that if you look at the TVL, you should also be aware of who the curators are and what those
mhm,
entail. And it's the same thing essentially replicated on Morpho, except anyone can become a creator and anyone can create a vault and blah, blah,
mhm,
blah. And that's
mhm,
how it works in CeFi land.
mhm, mhm, mhm,
It's just some, the problem in CeFi, it's less composable. And what
mhm.
happened in 2008 is essentially some of those became obscure because there was so much going on that people lost track of what the fuck was going on and what were the underlying assets. And
And
actually,
that's what
CeFi could
happening
help
right
here.
now, right? Like yeah, like it's also like can anybody using Aave really tracking all the parameters and like what's going on, right? Like so
No,
that's
no,
kind of
no.
like mirroring what's happening.
Yeah, you're trusting an entity that is curating, and that's
Yeah.
there's no way around it. You have to trust a curator, or you can become the curator if you wish and spin up your own vault. That's
Or
also a method, but it's
or
like curating
or
is a job within of itself.
yeah, or we can make data transparent and people will understand it easier. So build a
Yeah,
better
that's fair.
metrics. So
I mean
I
that's
haven't
kind of
looked
what
into lending data all
Andrew's
that well.
working on with Third, right? Like Andrew is trying to be like, okay, you can ask like the MCP what are like the risk parameters that I've like that I'm actually entering here if I'm depositing into a Morpho vault, and then he kind of like spins up this graph of like 20 different nodes and 5 multi-sigs and whatever. I think then into your argument of like the Aave TVL, I think you can kind of like look at this of like if I just look at the like DeFi Llama TVL list, there's like Pancake Swap somewhere very far up there. But like half of this will basically be like random meme tokens. So like you can kind of do that mental calculation of like how valuable is the TVL really based on like your perception of the project at large. I think like you're onto something of like in TVL doesn't equal TVL because like you need to look at the assets it consists of. I think the Aave TVL was so far the absolute gold standard. It's like kind of the highest, like, like people are trusting this to like other people to borrow their money against. So like, and like it kind of made, it was kind of the gold standard. Now it's like very, I don't know if I would like heavily discount it. I would think that like now Aave basically has a wake up call and they'll really kind of like monitor and like audit all of the assets that are listed. So like in the future, this is probably like a once, this happens once and then never again, at least in terms of like bridged assets and
Hopefully,
like the risk associated to this. Maybe there's an exploit in Lido, maybe there's an exploit in like any of the DeFi Lego stacks that we are building up. You can never know, but I think like at least for this LayerZero exploit or bridge
yeah,
exploits in general is probably like a relatively like lower risk factor now. But yeah,
yeah.
I think DeFi will have like this is a real big reputation problem now because Aave was the Swiss bank of DeFi. And I think this now makes it very, very hard for like traditional asset allocators to be like, okay, let me like explore like with 5% of my portfolio, let me explore DeFi. Because like currently it's also like like a big problem is now all the positions in Aave are like completely locked in there. Like if you have money in Aave, even in the USDC pool or something, even though you're completely fine in terms of like you get your money back 100%, it's completely backed, but somehow the utilization rate of all the pools in Aave is currently at 100% because people have just been trying to get money out, and like because they're basically like hedging their risks. They're like, okay, if I'm stuck in this pool anyways, I might as well like withdraw USDC, and then kind of like if Aave somehow collapses, then I'm fine. Like I've at least gotten my USDC, like the 80% loan to value ratio or whatever I have on my ETH. And like they're very price insensitive, and like Aave recently changed its yield curve, so like now even like the borrow rates don't go up to like absurd amount of APY anymore, but rather like currently even at 100% utilization, the borrow rate for USDC, if you like deposit ETH into Aave right now and you try to borrow USDC against it, even though the utilization rate is at 100%, it only costs you 15% per year, which is ridiculous. Like that's like way too low. I have no idea what the fuck they were doing with these like risk utilizations. The utilization ratio, like at the closer to 100% the utilization ratio goes, usually you would expect the AP, like the fee to like hold that USDC to be very high. It's 15%. I'm absolutely flabbergasted by this. Like I only realized this yesterday. But anyways, I think that's kind of like how I see the world of DeFi right now. I think like the reputation is going to be very, very hard to fight back, and like we're going more and more into kind of permission fi instead of DeFi. I think the Arbitrum DAO, like basically invoking their security council and securing 71 million. That's also like a big kind of like bigger news than we discussed in this episode. But yeah, it is what it is. With that, I think let's end this episode. You've listened to the Index podcast, and catch you in 2 weeks. Bye bye. Crypto Day Wizards, come join us.